Welcome to Systemic Societal Health, the podcast that explores how the science of energy networks creates a logical, practical, rigorous, and heartwarming understanding of what goes into building healthy, durably vibrant human networks. I'm your host, Dr. Sally Gerner, Research Director for Edinburgh University's Planetary Health Lab. Today we're going to be talking with Dan Fiscus about his work as a research scientist with RARE, Research Alliance for Regenerative Economics, and his work as coordinator for the Western Maryland Food Council and interdisciplinary collaboration for food system change in the Appalachian Mountains of Maryland. So Dan has a BS in electrical engineering and MS in ecology and biomathematics and a Ph.D. in environmental science. His research interests include theoretical ecology, ecological network analysis, sustainable human-environment relationships, and finding leverage points for social change that benefits people and planet. So welcome to the podcast, Dan.
Thank you.
So Dan, tell us a little bit about what you do with the Western Maryland Food Council. And what is it?
The Western Maryland Food Council grew out of another project that I worked on, and we might talk about some called Frostburg Grows. And the purpose of the Western Maryland Food Council has been since about 2015 to try to bring together active participants in a bunch of different sectors of the food system to work on systemic change and address a lot of concurrent crises related to food out here in rural Maryland. So we had folks coming from farming and agriculture, myself as kind of an environmental scientist and researcher and sustainability scientist, folks working in healthcare and the health of food and dietitians, folks working in economic development who saw agriculture as a place to generate jobs and economy, and several others. And we've been trying to address problems which don't easily fall to any one sector to handle. So things like food insecurity. We have a very high proportion of folks out here that are in need of food assistance, or the harmful human health effects of food in our diet, or the struggles of small and sustainable ag folks that want to start up. Those are the kinds of things that are multi-sector and sort of systemic that we try to collaborate on together to come up with solutions.
So is this a nonprofit, or is it as a independent agency, or is it working with some kind of government groups? Or
the Food Council is not incorporated. It has been a project underneath another nonprofit. So we've had a nonprofit that was basically our fiscal agent, but the main partner has been the University of Maryland Extension. So even though the council doesn't live inside the University of Maryland, some of the most important leaders, the current president, both the brains and the workers have come from University of Maryland Extension. Another key group that has provided folks and support has been the local hospital, the regional hospital that's now called UPMC Western Maryland, as part of the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center. And that hospital for years has been making investments in improving the quality of food and local food because they see the direct connection to their population health.
Wow.
So it's kind of like a coalition, really. We've gone back and forth over the years thinking if we should incorporate it as our own 501c3, and we just haven't done it yet.
Okay, so, and this grew out of Frostburg Grows, and I know that you've told me some about this in the past, and it had to do with reclaiming land that had been sort of essentially poisoned by strip mining and coal mining in Appalachia, and turning it over into growing local trees and composting and just basically reclaiming the soil so you could grow healthy food on it. Can you tell me more about that?
Sure. So Frostburg Grows started in 2012. And as you said, it was built on a former strip mine. And a part of this site that we were operating on, or still are operating on, also had a long wall mine. So it was sort of a deep pit coal mine. And the guy and a couple of folks who came up with this idea actually started working on it in 2009, wanted to use and do a demonstration project on a former strip mine, of which there's a lot of strip mine land out here, all different stages of total devastation to coming back in terms of trees or grassland, but lots of strip mining out here. So the idea was to put greenhouses, high tunnel greenhouses on this former strip mine as a demonstration project and as a training center. So we wanted to show that you could use these high tunnel greenhouses. They're also called hoop houses. They have steel hoops and then plastic covering. They're really good out here because they help with season extension. So our growing season is pretty short. We're about anywhere from 1,000 to 2,000 feet above sea level. And so our growing season is kind of like June 1 to October. With high tunnels, you can start planting vegetables easily April 1st. You have all your ducks in a row and are really well organized, and you can grow till December. So you basically add 4 months onto the growing season, which is a huge amount, a big increase. And so we got a grant from the EPA, and it went through American Rivers. And we built 6 of these high tunnel greenhouses. They're pretty big. They're 30 feet wide and 120 feet long. And as we were building them, we also used each construction event as a training program. So we advertised it to the community. Folks were able to sit in for 3 hours of classroom presentation. And then the next day, Saturday morning, we would go build a high tunnel greenhouse together. So there was training involved. Folks could learn how to build and use high tunnels. And then we grew food there ourselves with the help of AmeriCorps and volunteers from the community and volunteers from Frostburg State University. A couple interesting things about the site: because it was a strip mine, there was no water. We weren't able to drill a well because the water, the soil and water and everything underground was contaminated. So we had to live on rainwater, and we still do catch all our own irrigation water from rain. We also collected the leaves and grass and brush from the city of Frostburg, their yard waste program. Instead of throwing that in the landfill, they brought it to us and we turned it into compost. So that's, that was Frostburg Grows. And from that kind of work, the Food Council grew out of that because we were working to help stimulate local growers and local economy and local food, and learned about some of these other systemic issues like food insecurity and many others.
Wow. Okay, so you're also very interested in the theory that goes with this, and actually the measures, so you were one of the main authors of this top 10 measures of systemic vitality that the RARE group put out. What was it, 2019, I guess it is. Can you tell me more about those and how they would relate to what the kinds of things you're doing there in Frostburg and Maryland?
Sure, yeah. So that work, to me, when I think about it, it basically starts a lot with the work of Bob Ulanowitz. And, even though perhaps only one of those top 10 indicators is directly from one of Bob's own metrics for sustainability, it's one of the most important ones. So Bob, and also like me, came up through academic ranks studying ecosystems. So we studied more natural systems, things like the Chesapeake Bay or the Florida Everglades or forest soils or things like that, and the food webs, which are all great candidates for modeling with networks, ecological network analysis. And then, over the years and through collaboration with folks like you, largely, Bob and me and others started to apply the metrics that came out of study of ecological networks to economies and social networks and human systems. And I still think that those 10 metrics that we put in that paper need more work. That I've written a few grant proposals which weren't funded, but I want to keep working on it. And one idea is to use a system kind of like Maryland, maybe based on the counties of Maryland as sort of study units, and calculate these top 10 metrics for regenerative systems, for regenerative economies, and then see how they're correlated to other important variables, such as ones that are readily available, like human health statistics, economic quality statistics, environmental quality statistics. And, the hypothesis would be that the top 10 measures, which tell you structural and functional aspects of the way systems work as a network, would be highly correlated to these other important things like human health, environmental quality, and economic vitality. And I think that would be true also for connections to the food system. And so things like the sustainability of the ecosystem services that we need to grow food are going to be closely correlated to human health, in terms of things like out here we have basically epidemics of diabetes, obesity, and other food, sort of preventable food-related major illnesses. And so I think we could do the same kind of study, testing the efficacy of top 10 metrics spread out here.
That sounds wonderful. Actually, getting the echo again. So we've been talking with Laura Lennick, and she's got a couple of jobs both of which she might be able to use as pilot projects for developing the measures. That's just a sort of a add-on or non sequitur, but yeah, all related to food systems, by the way. Okay, so you're also working on a new version or a new, more popularized version of a book you put out in 2018 called Foundations for Sustainability, a Coherent Framework of Life-Environment Relations. This is again with Brian Fath. And it sounds like your emphasis is on conventional science paradigm, going back to Descartes, Newton, classical science kind of things, as the cause of the global ecological crisis, and that the key focus for change is to solve the crisis and achieve sustainability has to do with switching to a new paradigm of holistic life science. So you want to talk more about that?
Okay. Yeah, that's really kind of my focus right now of my work. And I think this is important not only because it seems like it can help us solve the global ecological crisis and achieve sustainability, but it's also an area that I don't see other people working on it. So it seems like a niche that needs somebody to fill the niche and speak up in this area. So one way to start thinking about what we have in our book is that if you think about all this, I call them symptoms. You can think of symptoms of ecological crisis that we're seeing right now. It's a long and scary list, right? It's the one we've heard over and over again. There's climate disruption, mass species extinctions, nitrogen cycle disruptions, sea level rise, pollution, including microplastics. It just keeps going, and each one is really kind of a full-blown crisis in its own right. And faced with this, a lot of environmental scientists or sustainability folks will pick one, something like climate crisis, climate change, and they'll focus on that, and they'll sort of drill in and say, we're going to work on climate change. We have to reduce CO2 and greenhouse gases. Rather than do that, what Brian and I did was to zoom out and look at all of these crises, like imagine them around the outside of a circle, and ask, what is it they all share? What's right in the center that might be causing all of these symptoms of crisis? And when we did that and asked about it and dug into it, what we find that we propose is that the center causing all of those symptoms is the paradigm of science. And there are two core ideas at the center of conventional science that cause this crisis. And this is like the tip of an iceberg to talk about stuff like this, but there's a lot more detail in the book, and I'll be happy to follow up with anybody that's interested. But the first thing that conventional science does is to split life from the environment. So there's nowhere explicitly in like page 1 of a biology textbook where it says, life is over here and environment is over here, and they're categorically different. But that's essentially what it does. Okay, and you can see it when you think of things like, what's the story of the origin of life? It's a cellular origin, right? It's a cell that somehow cobbles itself together up out of the primordial ooze. Rather than like a planetary origin of life, which is what we developed this hypothesis in the book, and it's borrowed and shared from other folks as well. So the key thing, if you split life from environment, what can then happen is that the value of life can be elevated above the value of environment. If you don't split them, that can never happen. Okay, so once you split them and you change the value, you can now promote life, including human life, and degrade environment. And that mismatch can lead to all of these external symptoms like climate disruption, species extinctions, destruction of the Amazon forest, all of the others, because we devalued the environment. The other core idea at the center of conventional science is that it treats everything as a mechanism. The core metaphor, I think I learned it from one of your books. It's like the root metaphor of the culture is that everything can be treated as a mechanism. And this includes all living things. Okay, so once you do that, the next side effect of that is that mechanisms are inherently entropic. They're entropy producing. So the assumption with a mechanism is that it's going to degrade its environment. It depends on a constant input of high quality energy, and it's always going to emit low quality energy and waste. So when you put those two together, it becomes seen as inevitable and normal and unavoidable that the environment will degrade over time. But that's the opposite of what natural ecosystems do. Natural ecosystems and the planetary biosphere have improved the environment over time. The fact that we have an oxygen atmosphere and the fact that soils naturally and spontaneously always grow in depth and improve in fertility are just two of many examples that the normal way to live is to improve your environment. It's the opposite of what machines do. So those are the critiques that we put forward in the book, and then we say that other paradigms, including indigenous science, indigenous wisdom, indigenous cultures, have this figured out, and then also holistic life science, which is based on the work of Bob Ulanowitz and Brian Fath and others, including your work, is a better paradigm. And in fact, until we switch and transform science to that new paradigm, if we continue to use conventional science and we think we're solving the climate crisis, for example, we're probably making things worse.
So how is that last part? How does using conventional science make working on the sustainability crisis worse? Can you give me an example?
Yes. So if you go back to what I said about the sort of this concentric circle with all of the symptoms of crisis around the outside, right? You have climate disruption, nitrogen cycle, species extinction, sea level rise, all of these symptoms. If you're going to use the conventional paradigm, you're going to start to analyze the situation. The main pillars of the conventional paradigm are analytical, which means to split things apart, reductionistic, mechanistic, okay? So as soon as you begin to do that, you're already headed down the same road that created the crisis. And we're basically going to just perpetuate the same thing. So inherent in that effort to say, okay, let me just focus on climate crisis. And let me boil that down even more. Let me analyze it and reduce it even more. Let me just focus on CO2. Okay, as soon as you've made steps like that, you're now calling everything else an externality that I'm not going to deal with. I'm not going to account for it. I don't have time. It's not in my budget. It's not in my paper. I'm not going to write about it. Those kinds of decisions are the same kinds of decisions that have gotten us here. Failure to do full accounting, failure to be holistic, and keep track of all of the, not just economic capital or not even one at a time, CO2 capital or energy capital, all of it. That's what we're going to do, is solve one little tiny problem and create 2 or 3 others over here that are probably worse.
So I guess I would have instead of putting science at the center of this problem, I would have probably put the neoliberal economics in particular, or just sort of the whole, profit maximizing oligarchic capitalism kind of thing. So why did you choose to do science as opposed to the particular economic paradigm that's actually rationalized by the science or legitimized by the science in many ways?
Because of what you just said. The rationalizing and the legitimizing, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah, it's true.
It's so baked in that these are ideas that we don't think consciously anymore. These are ideas we think with.
Right.
Right. So one way, if you want to catch how deeply ingrained this is, start watching for when people use the word mechanism. Okay. This is my hyper, OCD way to keep track of this. If you watch and read when people say the word or write the word mechanism, it almost never actually means mechanism. It's become reified, right? So we've mistaken, like hundreds of years ago, it was a great idea to say, what if we treat this system or this human body as if it is a mechanism? Then we can use it as a model and we can do some interesting things. We forgot that whole part. And now the assumption is that it's actually in a mechanism, or that there's no problem of treating it directly as a mechanism. One other answer to your question is just that there's so much other good work on the oligarchic capitalism, like your work, and other good work on different parts of it, that I don't see anybody critiquing the scientific paradigm. And I don't think it's the only answer, but I think it's connected to other ones at the root, just like you were saying about capitalism.
Well, I do know of a number of biologists who are doing the critique of the science, but they're not actually in ecosystems. Most of the ones I'm thinking of are Brian Goodwin, who did a lot of work on, what was his, how the leopard got his spots or changed his spots, and or Lynn Margulis's serial symbiosis, which is the same kind of deal where you realize that life co-evolved with the atmosphere, for instance, and things like that. So life and environment were never separate, and in fact, everything's co-evolving. So I think there is, but I think you're doing an excellent job of articulating the root problem of it all. I mean, because I tend to work on the same kinds of issues, but I come at it from a physics thing, which is nowhere near as clear as your explanation of it.
Well, you make great points, and Lynn Margulis is in our book. We tried to cite everybody who, I agree, others are saying this, but rather than saying we came up with it, we're just saying, like, all these great voices said it, and let's rally this chorus, rally this big loud chorus together and add our one voice to it, and just say it loud and clear.
Well, I think you really have done a really good job of explaining it to a lay audience here, I think. So, okay, this is about all the time we have. So I really appreciate your time, and thank you so much for explaining all the stuff that you're doing. It's very interesting. It's somewhat heartening for me anyway.
Well, thank you too. Thank you for the time and the invitation and the opportunity.
Okay, take care.